Confidence among South African CEOs has stabilised after a strong rise that started in the middle of last year. Merchant Tech's CEO Confidence Index registered at just over 64 points in the second quarter, unchanged from the first quarter. Here to tell us more is Craig Margolius from Merchant Tech Capital. Craig, thanks for coming in today. Well, Craig, we've seen a bit of uncertainty creeping back into not just the global economy but the local economy as well over the past quarter. So it's not really surprising then, I should imagine, that you would see confidence starting to taper off.
Absolutely. The Merchant Tech CEO Confidence Index in this quarter has shown a mixed bag of results. Not surprising. When we look in more detail as to which sectors responded and how they responded, it tells a very, very complicated story as to why there is this mixed sentiment. Just to remember, in the first quarter of this year, the score was 64.18. The second quarter, we're sitting at a score of 64.12. But what is interesting is when we delve into that, we start to see what has caused this relationship or this stagnation, as it were, in the results. Just to go back to economic conditions of the second quarter of 2009, the score was 35. We're currently sitting at a score of 60. So again, still a significant increase on current economic conditions and the CEO sentiment in that compared to last year.
Just looking across the sectors, are there any sectors that stand out as being particularly negative?
Particularly negative is the basic materials sector. And if we look in the basic materials sector are the mining giants. And they've had quite negative sentiment that's finally been creeping in, potentially as a result of governments citing that they want to be more involved in the mining sector. Words like nationalisation of mines are concerning those CEOs. And when we delve into the results, specifically in the basic materials, we can see the CEOs aren't investing as much as they used to in the past in their mining companies, and there's obviously concern that they're not going to get return on that investment because of the uncertainty of government involvement.
Not investing in mining companies. Also perhaps just because of the commodity outlook, the uncertainty of the growth picture coming out of China and of the West as well. Concern
as to global demand for those commodities is tapering off a bit.
Now, you've chosen to highlight the retail sector in particular this quarter, getting the thoughts of Pick n Pay CEO Nick Badminton. How's the retail sector seeing the recovery at this stage?
Well, on speaking to Nick, and we form a relationship with all the CEOs that we bring into this confidence index. He said he agrees with us. He's cautiously optimistic. Why the consumer services sector has performed relatively well is off the back of the Soccer World Cup. He was surprised by the sale of his merchandise, by the sale of all the consumer goods, as well as food retailers have done very well. That being said, he's saying be cautious because the Consumer Protection Act that comes in later this year will taper that growth back a bit. So there is a lot of concern there from them.
So that's one of the risks for the retail sector. Correct. Going forward. And of course, this Consumer Protection Act will make retailers responsible for the goods that they're selling, regardless of whether they're at fault or not, doesn't it? And do you think Mr. Badminton's feelings are indicative of the retail sector as a whole?
Yes, the retail sector, we have to split them into either the fashion retailers or the food retailers. Food retailers have been relatively okay in this period, and again, that's off the World Cup, that's off the demand for food retail stuff. The concern, obviously, with the clothing retailers is they haven't had a good time. They're not manufacturing as much as they used to, and that's being reflected again in the consumer goods sectors as well.
Of course, World Cup is now over, though, so do you think confidence could take a bit of a dip?
Confidence will pull back a slight bit, and we're seeing this, that a score of 64.12 is probably going to stay stagnant for the next 2 to 3 quarters. We don't see significant growth from that.
How about food inflation? Because that's a double-edged sword really for the food retailers. It gives consumers confidence they can go, that the food prices aren't going up on the shelves for them, but it does cut into the margins of food retailers, doesn't it?
Correct, and that is the concern the retailers have, and obviously the concern over job losses coming through as well. We've lost quite a few jobs in the last 6 months, and the retailers are also feeling the brunt of that. The positive side is, if we can believe it, off the back of increased wages for all the union workers and government employees, maybe they will spend more after they've received those increases.
And also hopefully as unemployment starts to turn around and we start to create more jobs. And how about banks? They seem to be quite unoptimistic at this stage, or pessimistic rather.
Yes, when we look at the banking sector, they've gone from a score in the fourth quarter of 2009 of 70 down to a score of 60 in this quarter. So that is almost a 14% drop-off from last year. And that's purely off the Eurozone debt crisis, uncertainty as to global credits, if that's going to filter through the system to South Africa. Bad debts are increasing as we speak, and the banks are feeling the brunt of that. Also, demand for credit from consumers has tapered off, and that's also affecting the bank's confidence.
But now something that was brought up by a number of the companies, I should imagine, is access to capital and banks not being willing to lend to companies. So on the one hand, banks aren't going to benefit from making those loans, but they're not really willing to stick their hands in their pockets at this stage.
There definitely is concern. And when we spoke to the CEOs about their investment in their companies in the coming months, the resounding response was, yes, we're moderately optimistic about investing in our companies in the coming months, but the biggest concern they have is access to that capital, and that doesn't seem to be flowing, or the cost of accessing that capital is still increasing or has not come down.
Do you think Pick n Pay was particularly confident because they have been investing in their business, they've been building new distribution warehouses, putting in new distribution systems, and that's really going to give them a leg up going into the future? Do you think that might have added to Pick n Pay's confidence?
Where that has come through is the sale of Franklin's for the 1.4 billion rand that they were talking about. They're hoping to inject that back into their distribution, as you've mentioned, and hopefully that'll have a cost reduction. Whether that's going to drive their volumes and their sales is yet to be determined.
Just going on from here, how would you expect confidence to perform in the quarters ahead? Because there is still a lot of uncertainty in the economy. Going
ahead, we'll have to look at specific sectors to see where the growth stories are going to be coming from. Technology has been relatively flat and stable through this period. I suppose the most important sector that has to come off is consumer goods and manufacturing, because that will tell a story of offshore demand for our locally produced products. If that improves, then we're on a solid footing going forward.
Craig, we have to leave there. Thank you very much for coming in today.